webinar, we're fine with, if you have questions along the way, we're happy to interrupt and take those. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the chimes off. All right. And go ahead and begin. If you're having any problems, you can go ahead and type them in, and Gohar will try to solve them as we go. And then pretty soon here we're going to turn off the chat mode and then just put it in question and answer mode. So just first of all, about me, my name is Caitlin again. I live in Eureka, California. I work with Democracy Unlimited, which is one of the organizations that's been part of the Move to Amend Coalition from the founding in 2009, actually, in the fall of 2009. And my role with Move to Amend is that I'm on the executive committee, and I also coordinate our field organizing. And so those of you who have been on these calls before have heard my voice before, and you've probably gotten emails from me too. And Gohar is one of our interns at Democracy Unlimited. And I also see that Margaret joined us. She's on our field organizing team as well. She's in Willits, California right now. And Kaya may join us, and if she does, she'll actually be in presenter mode, so she might chime in. But I don't think that she's here now, and she was having some difficulties, so she might not be able to join us. And she's in Madison, Wisconsin. So, just orientation to this webinar process, if you haven't done this before. The ads on the side have nothing to do with us, so try your best to ignore those. It's a free service, which is helpful to us, but the drawback is that there are those ads. You can see who else is here. We've made the participant list public. It's the little blue folks. That's you. And if you need to make feedback to us, you can let me know if I'm going too fast or too slow through the feedback mechanism with next to your little person. And if you want to maximize your screen, that's generally the best way to view the presentation. But it also means that you won't be able to see the chats at the bottom. So do make sure that you keep that in mind. And again, if you have questions, you can chat them at the bottom. So I'm seeing that there are a few people who are having trouble with the phone, and especially if they're using their Gmail. Definitely people have used it before, so that shouldn't be a problem. And if they can't even hear me anyway. So Gohar, you're going to need to chat to them that they should keep trying and that it's worked before. And other than that, I don't know what to say. Maybe try a phone line if they still can't make it work. Okay, so hopefully those folks will be able to chime in here soon. So our agenda for today is that I'm going to do a quick introduction to the Move to Amend Coalition and Affiliation refresher, just because we always have so many new folks on these calls, and I've been getting a lot of feedback that it's helpful to get those refreshers. So apologies to those of you who have been on all these webinars, but we'll go quick through that. And then nuts and bolts tips, we're going to cover recruiting new people to your group, working with volunteers, hosting good meetings, and also I have some announcements for you. And just keep in mind that for the nuts and bolts tips, we could do a whole training, especially in person, on each of these three topics, and so I'm going to give you some stuff, but we have some materials that I can email you if you would like more, and we will be doing some trainings at the Democracy Convention in August that I'm going to talk about at the end, where we'll have our first affiliate gathering, and I really would encourage everyone to plan to come to that in Madison, August 24th through 28th, and we'll have a full day to do a lot of these organizing training skills. So, sorry everybody, as soon as they're all done working that out, you want to turn off the chat mode. If it still doesn't work, then there's not much we can do. Okay. They can listen to the recording. Okay, so introduction to Move to Amend. As you all probably know, we have basically 4 pieces to our motion. Number one is to abolish corporate personhood. Number 2 is to establish that money is not speech, and those two we often put together because they really do go very hand in hand. 3 is guarantee the right to vote and to participate and to have all our votes and participation count. And 4 is to protect local communities, their economies, and democracies against control and domination by large corporations. These, of course, aren't the only 4 things to address to have democracy in the United States, but we think all 4 of these are really key and critical, and that's our end goal, to establish democracy in the United States and to build a movement that will do that. So our organizing strategy is really focused around building a movement, because we don't control Congress. We can't control Congress through elections, because we know that almost everyone who is there has been elected through corporate money, and that's who they're really beholden to. So we need to build a grassroots movement that is powerful enough to drive our agenda into Washington, D.C. So we're starting with local resolutions, building up to state initiatives, and driving, as I said, to Washington, D.C. ultimately. So the next image really just shows that building of momentum at the grassroots level. If you're interested in this, I encourage you to check out our orientation webinar, where we really covered our organizing strategy in detail. If you want to affiliate a local group with Move to Amend, there's information on how to do that at both of these 2 links here. Our goals for our local affiliates are that they have a coalition and movement building emphasis, that they use the Move to Amend name to get that out there in communities everywhere, to grow all of our numbers through sharing lists back and forth. So we'll share with you the names of the people in your community and how to reach out to them with you. And then also our hope is that you will collect signatures and grow our numbers. That you have democratic internal processes, that you have a commitment to anti-oppression and movement building through your organizing and also through your internal power structure, and we have some information about what we mean by that. You can catch that link after this webinar. And ultimately, those local affiliates will grow towards state chapters that will have a seat on our organizing steering committee at the national level. Community resolutions are our #1 goal for Move to Amend in 2011. Resolutions are an opportunity to build your affiliate organization, to educate and mobilize the public, to connect corporate personhood and the other Move to Amend links to local examples in communities to make it more relevant to people. And they're non-binding, so there's not a threat of a lawsuit, but they're powerful in that they require elected officials and the public to take a position, and so it really puts us in front of your community to ask what people think about this. So I want to give a shout out to Boulder, which looks like it will be our next community that will be considering a resolution. They're working with their city council to get a resolution placed on their ballot for this year, November 2011. And in mid-July, there'll be a council meeting where they'll decide whether they're going to do that, and our hope is that they will, the city council. And then we all need to help Boulder get that passed. And Madison was our first community to do it through the initiative process. In April, they passed their resolution. So there's lots of options for how to pass these resolutions. You can actually just start at the organizational level and involve community organizations in Move to Amend by asking them to pass resolutions. And actually, our webinar next month in August will be on reaching out to organizations and building coalitions. You could work with your college or university and get it passed to a student government level or campus-wide vote or some of the other legislative, basically the bodies on the campus. You could work with your local government, as the example. of what Boulder is doing, and then Boulder's kind of actually doing a hybrid because they're also working on a local ballot initiative asking their city council to place it on the ballot for them. In Madison, they collected signatures to place it on the ballot. So all of those are options, and then as we grow, we'll be building towards states passing resolutions through state legislators and also state ballot initiatives. So that's kind of the recap to plug everybody in, hopefully, who is new. And again, you can find a lot of this information on past webinars, and I encourage you to look at the archives. So I've asked Ohar with the questions to flag ones that are relevant to what I'm talking about right now, and then if there were, and then when there's other stuff that is more general in nature, we'll throw it into the questions that we'll have at the end, and we'll make sure to get to all of them. So, Move to Amend is about building a grassroots movement for democracy in the United States, and so community organizing is really key for us, and we all need to be adept at it if we're going to be successful. So, community organizing, as a reminder probably to most of you, but we have a lot of new folks coming on, and that's really exciting too. Community organizing is about building power, it's about understanding self-interest in the deepest sense, and growing and nurturing relationships. And relationships is really key. In order to get any of the things done that I'm going to cover today, and then a lot of other things too, including fundraising or some of the work to elected officials, is all about relationships. So if you kind of break it down in that way, anybody can be a community organizer. And active participation requires organization. So that's why we're getting to these nuts and bolt tips, because we want our affiliates to be really effective vehicles for movement in their communities and well organized, so that we can have a disciplined movement as we grow, and that will help make people want to be part of it. So I encourage you to consider doing what's called a recruitment campaign. Obviously, you can do recruitment all the time in a kind of low-level way, and that's kind of what comes naturally. You form a group and you think, we want to have more people. But if you actually think of it as a campaign, it makes it more clear to everybody else in your group what you're doing. You can set goals for yourself, and you can measure your success. So a recruitment campaign is about, or is effective for a number of different reasons. It, hold on one sec, sorry, dropping stuff. It creates visibility for your organization and helps you build your numbers. And visibility in numbers translates into grassroots power. You can also use your recruitment drive as an opportunity to get a lot of your campaign work done. It's also good for people, because we need people to win, and if we're going to accomplish our task, we need to get more people involved, and there's just no question about that. It's also an opportunity for education. They're kind of intrinsically valuable in that they get people thinking about the issues, and it provides you a clear sense of why you're going and talking to people. And then in that discussion, you're educating them. It gives you an opportunity to train volunteers. So you can sharpen your own skills and arguments. It keeps us in touch with what people are thinking about out there, helps us hone our message, and they're a really good place to teach campaign skills to other folks, to new volunteers. And if we're going to have this large discipline movement, we need to be skilled. So recruitment campaigns are an opportunity to train our volunteers and to build the organization. Helps us bring in new people, get people together, and increases our sense of our team, which is really key to making people feel like they want to stay involved. So we've got a question. Wendy from Florence, Oregon asked, how do we know corporations won't battle this movement and snuff it out? Well, I'm sure that corporations will battle this movement, and I would say that part of how we make sure that we don't get snuffed out is through our organizing skills and effectiveness. And that's part of also why it's really critical that we build a grassroots campaign, because it will be harder to snuff us out if we are in hundreds of communities across the country. But we do need to be prepared for a real fight. I mean, we're kind of talking about going to, the jugular of corporate power, and as such, it's critical that we're aware of how corporations are going to be, responding to us. Bob from East Kingston, New Hampshire asked, what kind of time frame do you think would work in terms of having a local resolution passed in towns in a state and then move the work to passing a state resolution? A couple years, long-term, work over 5 years. Do you have a sense of time frame? I think it's going to take, it depends on the community and the state, but it definitely could be quicker in some places and take longer in some others. For example, in Wisconsin, we have a number of active affiliates, and they're going to be ready to take on a state chapter pretty soon, I think. In some other places, we don't have affiliates yet at all. So, I could see Wisconsin being ready to be happening at the state level in a year or two, potentially, depending on what route they decide to take. But in other places, it could take up to 5 years. And in terms of an actual amendment, I think realistically, and we have to be realistic, we're talking about a decade or more. So I'm going to ask Gohar now that questions like this, let's save for the end. And if they're directly speaking to what I'm talking to in terms of understanding these slides, but otherwise we're not going to get through this content, and most people signed up for this call wanting to get to this topic, or the topics that we said we were going to cover. So I want to make sure that we get through all that before we get to kind of the bigger questions. And there's other avenues to get those questions asked as well. So, principles of a recruitment campaign, to carry on, are that they reach out to a broad constituency. And that's really important for Move to Amend in general. We cannot win this if we're only talking to ourselves. So, obviously, low-hanging fruit is important. Your friends, like I said, it's all about relationships. So, by all means, bring in the people that you already know. But keep in mind that you want to also reach out to a broad constituency, and so you need to build relationships with people who are not the people that you see every day or the folks that you instantly think of. We need to be growing. You want to use multiple methods for that recruitment. So just one example is that different kinds of technology and will probably help you reach different age groups. So keep that in mind. Same goes for different messages. So use different ways to bring in, again, that broad constituency. Establish a simple message and stick to it. We've found that corporate personhood, even though it still, isn't completely mainstream, it's getting more and more traction every day, and the concept is a little bit self-explanatory, and it begs a question when people don't understand. So that one we are using because it is working well. Get to know everyone, plug in the live wires. Live wires is a term that we use to describe folks who are, one, on fire, and that's coming from themselves, but then also they have, a lot of potential to be a real powerful and helpful force to your group. So, identify who those people are. If they have, little comment, thanks, from a watcher in the other room that I didn't even know was watching. So, the questions blank out the PowerPoint, and that's why it's best. We're going to cover, most of the big ones at the end. But again, when there is a question, that's okay if it covers up the PowerPoint, because I'll go back and make sure to cover it. So, but at the same time, those live wires might be, you might be attracted to just trying to bring just them into your group, but you want to get to know everyone and spread yourself far and wide, and then figure out how to make others into live wires. Ask everyone to do something, and that ask is really important. And I'll cover that in a little bit. Use other networks. So again, don't just go to the people you know. Look for other networks that already exist and plug in with them. Have materials ready. So again, this is speaking most specifically to a recruitment campaign. Make materials that center around recruiting people to your group, and always be recruiting. You could be in the grocery store in line and wearing a shirt, and somebody makes a comment, and think of that person as somebody to recruit. It's not just when you're out tabling at the festival with your recruitment in mind. So some points about why people join groups and participate in things. Number one is altruism, because they care about our issue, and there are a lot of people like that, and there are a lot of people like that who don't know that we exist yet. So they're out there, and we definitely want to find them. Another reason is self-interest, and that they get something out of joining. And sometimes self-interest, we can think of that as a bad thing, but it's really not. There are lots of things that people can get out of being part of a group, and we need to keep that in mind, that self-interest is going to be a motivator for everyone, and so we need to make clear why it's in their self-interest to join our group. And some of the things about joining a group in general, social needs that we all have, is to be social, to feel a sense of belonging, sometimes to conform, to make some kind of useful contribution to society, or to reduce personal feelings of responsibility. So when you're thinking about, what pitches you might make, think about all of these things, because they'll help make a more effective argument and ask to folks who you're trying to recruit. So now we're going to turn to working with volunteers. And I recognize that everybody on this call is a volunteer. I'm a volunteer with Move to Amend. So we're all volunteers. But this is sort of, talking about working with other volunteers. Even though as a leader in your group, you're, most likely a volunteer too. Some general principles of leadership development are that you should look for leadership potential in everyone. We're about democracy, so obviously our groups, and I said this explicitly in one of the things that we're looking for in the National Coordinating Committee for affiliates that are coming on, is that you have democratic processes. And so you want to look for leadership potential in everyone and be thinking about that. People who care about the issues need to be motivated to act on their concerns. Create opportunities for people to take on more responsibility. People stay involved because they feel challenged personally and because their efforts are making a difference. So showing clearly that they are making a difference is one part of that. And then the second part is that people like to be challenged. And so make sure that you're thinking about how you could kind of move them up in the ladder of responsibility and challenge so that they're learning, because people like learning. People take on more responsibility because they feel needed. So it's really critical to make sure that people feel as though they are needed. And if they don't feel needed, they're probably not going to stick with your group. Leaders develop because someone takes the time to give them meaningful feedback and build their confidence. And so if you're trying to grow leaders, you should keep that in mind, that you're not trying to criticize people and take them down. You're trying to build their confidence, but at the same time give them meaningful feedback that shows respect. And people stay for the long term because they feel part of a community. And so I really encourage you to think about that last one as you're thinking about your group and as you plan your events, that a big component of this is that people want to feel part of a community. And even though in a lot of ways it's one of the biggest problems that we're working against is the lack of community and the tearing down of community by corporate rule in our country, on the other hand, I think that actually we can look at that as a real asset, because we can help provide community and meaning for people through our groups, our local groups, and that will be incredibly valuable, and it'll be help build a real commitment to this movement. So we need to be thinking about opportunities to do that. But it's not all just about hard work, it's also about having fun and building those relationships in a meaningful way. Recruiting volunteers, you got to keep in mind that people are there for the meaning that they're getting out of the experience, not the money. So it kind of changes around, what you need to keep in mind. Things like making sure to ask them for help. If you don't actually ask for help, people will not necessarily know that you need it. So be clear about what your ask is and do the ask, and also don't just assume. Ask people what they like to do. People as volunteers are going to do the best work when they're doing something that they like. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's something easy, because like I said before, most people actually like to learn and be challenged, but they need to be able to be learning and being challenged in a way that they enjoy. Come up with a mental menu, which means have in mind as you're doing an ask what some of the options are, because you don't know what you don't know. So as you're asking somebody to participate or to get involved with Move to Amend in your community, they won't necessarily know what that means, so you need to have that in mind so that you can give them some examples. Know your overall project. That's about being strategic and kind of knowing where you're going and all the different ways that all the different pieces plug together so that you can best plug in people to those pieces. There's something for everyone to do. So tell you a quick story. We had a campaign that we did in our community in 2006, a ballot initiative, and we had a fellow come into our office who said, I'm mentally ill, I'm actually paranoid schizophrenic, but I really want to help, and I just need you to know, though, that I have some limitations on what I can do, but I hope that that won't keep me from participating. So we talked to him a little bit more about what that might mean, and he was so happy to help us by putting labels on postcards and get to hang out in the office and talk to people who were like-minded, share thoughts and ideas. And it was a great role for him to have, and he was really happy. And so were we, because he helped us do a giant mailing, and we could have other folks on the phones. So there's something for everyone to do, and you just have to be creative about making sure that you're finding something for them to do that fits with what their limitations and expectations are. So don't guess or think that you already know what people like to do. You have to ask them. Kind of obvious, but lots of times we don't do that. Really important is providing a context for the job. So to take that example of sticking labels on postcards, if you're going to ask somebody to do something like that, make sure that they understand, why that's important, who it's going to, even some of the thinking about the message that you're sending to those folks. Give them a context so that they can feel like they get what piece they're doing and how it fits into the bigger picture. And when somebody takes on a task, check to see how they're doing. Don't just assume that they have it under control. One, because if they fall down on the job, then you want to make sure that you know that sooner rather than later, and also because people might need support and they might have trouble asking for it. So if you check and see how they're doing, you can head off problems before they happen. Really key with working with volunteers is appreciating people for what they do. So even though you're a volunteer too, get in the habit of saying thank you. It's important to not set up a culture where people feel like they're, only just doing it as a favor to the leaders of a group, but at the same time, with that leadership comes some responsibility and an expectation that you're going to sort of be the voice of appreciation. And you can find ways for the whole group to appreciate people as well, and that's a really good idea. If someone's doing a good job, think about how they can take on more responsibility, and then work with them to move them up again that ladder of responsibility. And then a general principle, hand off as much responsibility as possible, as quickly as possible, into responsible hands. It's really important to delegate. So often we have groups where We have a few people doing all the work, and it's so easy for those folks to burn out or get frustrated, and it's lots of times because those folks aren't thinking about how to delegate, and there's not a culture of delegation in an organization. So as you're thinking about starting a new group, or even if you already have a group, it's still going to be relatively new since Move to Amend is new. So make sure that you cultivate a culture of delegation within Move to Amend, so that you don't run into those problems of burnout and frustration, and then also people not feeling like they're able to really participate with as much responsibility as they would like. Keep your word. Avoid doing it all yourself, just said. Keep track of what people say they will do. Since people are volunteers, lots of times they have other priorities that sometimes come first, so making sure you keep good notes at meetings or checking in with folks again to just make sure that people have a little bit of support to get their Move to Amend responsibilities done at the same time of all their other life responsibilities. And enjoy yourselves, have fun. Nobody's going to join a group that is unpleasant and that people don't feel, and it doesn't feel like people are enjoying what they're doing. And that's another really key point too, in terms of if you're asking people to do something. Or join your group, make sure that you seem enthusiastic about the work and what you're doing, because again, no one's going to join a group where it seems like drudgery. So again, thinking about leadership, effective groups need a lot of different kinds of leaders. And what makes a leader, there's a lot of things that go into making a leader, but some of the fundamental things that a leader is thinking about that maybe others in the group aren't necessarily, is developing the leadership of others. And so some questions to ask yourself is, what does this person need in order to develop his or her leadership in our group? And be thinking about that for everyone. And obviously, you don't have to come up with the answer to that yourself. You can actually engage the person to help come up with that answer, but be thinking about that question. And then the same goes for the next one. What would be the next step in taking on responsibility? And work in partnership with the volunteer in question to help them take on that more responsibility. Leaders also think about the group as a whole and ask questions like, what does the group as a whole need to be stronger? And how can our group more powerfully work together? So one other thing about identifying natural leaders is that if there are others in your group who are asking these sorts of questions, that's a good indicator that they're concerned about the group as a whole, and that you might want to bring them in to have more responsibility and more leadership opportunities, because they're going to be thinking about those things anyway, and there'll be another head to help you do that. And then also, if there's different answers to those questions, it's better to have everybody around the table discussing them rather than having it go off in different directions. So, the best practices for good meetings. So I'm going to turn now to some quick tips about meetings, which are one of the key ways that when you recruit people to a group, this is one of the ways that they see your culture, get a sense of what you're doing, and this is also really important for everybody who's part of the group to feel like the group is effective. So, you know, you guys are all on mute, but I bet you if I asked how many of you have sat through a bad meeting, that 100% of folks would raise your hands. So here's some ideas that we use to help us out, and you probably have others too, and especially for those folks who are already approved affiliates, we do have our listserv, so if you have materials to add into this discussion, by all means, please add them. And again, if folks would like additional resources on any of these topics, you can email me at the end, and I'll send them to you. So one thing to keep in mind about good meetings is that there's lots of times we create meetings just because we're not sure what else to do. So it's important to think about, you know, when you should call a meeting. So number one reason is to make decisions. And that's probably the number one reason why people go to meetings, is to be part of decision making. So if you have decisions to make, you should have a meeting. You also could use a meeting, though, for a number of other things, and sometimes we forget about them. You could brainstorm ideas about where the group should go, sometimes to celebrate a victory, build morale, recognize or reward leadership, to have a place and time to complete tasks. And lots of times we call those actually work parties, to make it clear to folks that they're not just going to come and sit and make decisions, but they're actually going to do the work. Things like writing fundraising letters, stuffing envelopes, coming up with names of people to invite to an event, et cetera, all that sort of stuff. Especially when you're working with volunteers, sometimes it can be hard for people to find time to do the work in between meetings. So potentially building in a structure so that you actually have a work party as part of your meetings can help make sure that that work is actually getting done. And you can also have meetings to provide opportunities for training or learning. So key for good meetings is that people bring people. So rely on relationships when thinking about how to get people to your meetings. The best way to invite people to come to a meeting is face-to-face. The next best option is on the phone, and email is a far, far distant third. And too often we think that if we send an email out to a bunch of people, they're going to be a bunch of people who come to our meeting. But really, email is good for reminders. Only the most, eager people who were basically in a position that they didn't even know it, but they were waiting around for you to tell them that they could participate and move to amend. Only those folks are going to be recruited solely on an email. So use emails for reminders, but don't rely on it to ensure meeting attendance. And just a random statistic, the emails are sort of like flyers in terms of how much attention people pay to them. So unless you have like a really hot button community issue, it will take 1,000 flyers to attract one person on average to come to a meeting. So again, those personal asks and relying on your relationships are really what's key to make sure that your meetings are well attended. It's also important to have goals for your meetings. So first question is this meeting necessary? And some ways that you can determine whether a meeting should happen. on why you're having the meeting, as in what is the goal of the meeting, or goals. Where do you want your group to be at the end of the meeting that is different from where it was before the meeting? So this is not to discourage you from having regular meetings. We actually really encourage affiliates to begin holding regular meetings in your community because it provides a place for you to plug new people in and for people to begin to have kind of an institutionalized way to get together with other Move to Amend folks. But it's important for you to have clear goals for those meetings and think about, how the meeting is going to move your group forward, even if there's totally new people who are coming, each time. Because that'll make the meeting better and it'll make it more likely that people are going to come back. So you want to make sure to prepare for your meeting in advance. And the ways that you can prepare is to know who's coming. So asking folks to RSVP is helpful. But you also might just kind of have a sense of who's going to be there based on past participation. So kind of running through that in your mind and not having it be a surprise so that you can anticipate problems would be kind of the number one thing there. Remind people to come. So don't just say at your meeting at the end that there'll be another meeting. Make sure that you send those email reminders and ideally phone calls, especially for, again, those live wires or new people who don't yet feel really connected to your group. Say they sign up at a tabling event, but they seemed really encouraged. I would suggest that you give them a phone call before, even if, you already passed them out a flyer, but give them a phone call to give a personal touch to remind them to come. Make sure you include good directions. Might be a no-brainer, but lots of times we don't do this. And don't assume that people who know the community will know where it is, because you might have new people coming, or people might not have the same sub-communities as you do. So to make it more accessible to folks who are maybe new to you or new to the circles that you run in, make sure you include good directions. Make specific assignments for participants so that they have a clear role while they're there, and I'm going to talk a minute about some of the roles. And come early so that you can be prepared and well prepared and in the right headspace as the meeting starts. And ideally, you want to actually greet people as they're coming in. And if you're not able to do that yourself because you need to be doing other things, then you can even designate somebody to be the greeter. It's not on this roles list, but it definitely could be. And you could have a couple folks do that, especially if you're planning to have new people come. It's good to make them feel welcome. So some roles, and these are not the only roles that exist, but some common roles in meetings, is that there's a facilitator who runs the meeting. Sometimes there's more than one. A scribe can write ideas on a flip chart to help everyone keep track, which is different than a note taker. The point of writing ideas on the flip chart is because some people are more visual learners than others. And so it can be a good idea to help those people participate by seeing what you're talking about in front of you. And it kind of can be good for everyone to help, keep people on track and also synthesize the ideas into, as you're moving. You could have a separate stacker who keeps the list of who wants to speak. My preference as a facilitator is to be the stack taker myself. But some groups have a separate stacker. I have seen the stacker used successfully when you're doing training. So you could have a new person facilitating the meeting or a newer person, less experienced person facilitating the meeting, but a facilitator could take the stack to kind of help make sure, because that's kind of the most common mistake that facilitators early on make, is forgetting to not just listen to the speaker, but watch everyone in the room to make sure there's no one new who wants to talk. You could also flip that and have the experienced person be the facilitator and a stacker be a new person to kind of give them a foot in the door working up towards a facilitator. So that one is optional if you want to have it be a separate role. A note taker takes detailed notes as opposed to the scribe and distributes them to all the participants afterwards, so they could do that on a computer or by hand, but they're more detailed than what a scribe would take down on flip chart paper. A timekeeper lets the group know when the discussion time is almost over and also at agreed upon points. So maybe at halftime or when you only have like 5 minutes left. Sometimes people rely on the facilitator to do this, but it can be really helpful to have someone other than the facilitator keeping time. And then the participants. Lots of times we forget about those and don't think of them as having a role, but the participants are responsible for helping the facilitator do his or her job, following the ground rules, keeping on topic, being self-aware. We can't just rely on our facilitators to make sure that our meetings go well, because we want to have a culture of having everyone take responsibility for our successful meetings. And so I encourage you to set that dynamic up from the very beginning of your group. So some roles for the facilitator, and I'm not going to go through all of these at great length, but just to run through them pretty quickly. They help the group define their goals and objectives and assess what they need to create plans. They help the group use their time efficiently and make well-considered decisions. They can also, therefore, help a group realize that it's not ready to make a decision yet and needs to wait. They make sure to test assumptions, or they make sure that assumptions are surfaced and tested. So if there's disagreement in the room, rather than glossing over it, it's actually the facilitator's job to kind of surface it and help figure out what really is behind it and how to resolve it. They support members in managing their own interpersonal dynamics. They manage conflict using a collaborative approach. They help the group access resources from inside and outside, and sometimes, obviously a facilitator isn't the only one to do that, but when you are facilitating, keeping that in mind is helpful. And facilitators really help set the tone for an environment in which members enjoy a positive, growing experience while attaining their goals. So if the facilitator is harried or grumpy, chances are that the meeting is going to be harried and grumpy. So make sure that you, as a facilitator, are aware of how much power you have in the tone of the meeting. Facilitators, I think, are also responsible for fostering leadership in others and for sharing responsibility in leading the group, and they are responsible for teaching and empowering others to facilitate. So obviously, it's an art to facilitate well, and not everyone has experience with it. But it's important to set up a group where there isn't only one person who facilitates all your meetings and has that knowledge. So make sure that you're training new folks and bringing them in as facilitators. And once you've facilitated a meeting, I guarantee that you will have a much better sense of how to be a good participant in future meetings. And so it can be really helpful to actually spread that around so that everyone can then take responsibility for facilitative process in all of your meetings, even if they're not the facilitator. So some things that a facilitator can do to help everything that I just said is welcome people, go over the agenda, do substantial introductions to make people feel welcome, consider the seating arrangements so that you don't have all the talkers on one side of the room or all the experienced people who have been there for a while on one side of the room and all the new folks on the other side of the room. Also, in a circle versus in rows, things like that. Using ground rules, and I'll give you some examples at the end. Explaining the decision-making process. This is really important. Making sure that everyone knows how to participate in the decision-making process who's there. Defining your role as a facilitator so that people know what it is and what it isn't. Making eye contact, using first names. I keep a little note to myself when I'm facilitating of the circle as people are sitting, and put down everyone's name. Obviously, if I'm in a new group where I don't know people's names, so that I can learn them quickly, because it really helps people to trust you and to be able to hear you if you're using their name. Use humor, use visuals, avoid responding to each comment. That's not the facilitator's role. And sometimes in meetings like this where the facilitator is also a participant who has a role too, there might be times where you are participating and just making sure that everybody else is clear when you're which and that you're clear too. Giving time for people to answer, not lecturing, inviting participation, giving positive feedback, respecting when people have difference of opinion, not trying to push everyone to consensus too quickly, empowering people, trying to get commitments from people for their ideas and for follow-through with their ideas. Make sure you end sessions on time, and as you end them, do a quick overview of kind of what the group did and coordination for the follow-up that has been agreed to. Using evaluation and thanking people for their work are also really key to help build trust in a facilitator. So, examples for an agenda, and obviously, again, this isn't the only way to make an agenda, but some common elements are a check-in, an opportunity to briefly go around the room and say how each person is doing. This can be a good way to air any issues that are prone to surfacing later anyway, like, you know, I'm really tired, I'm really grumpy, or I'm worried about this meeting because so-and-so isn't here and we really need them to move forward, and so that's on my mind. Those are some examples of things that people might say in a check-in. They also might say some good things too, and set a tone for you know, sharing what's going on with people on a personal level that's either happy or not, but that's going to potentially affect them in the meeting. Announcements. Good to have these up front at the beginning. Sometimes you can also do them at the end too. But making sure that you're clear what an announcement is. So an announcement is an upcoming event or item of interest. There's no discussion with an announcement, and if people really seem to feel that they need to get into the discussion over an announcement, you can decide to put it on the agenda. But that way you'll make sure that you stick to your agenda as opposed to having a new agenda made up of everybody's announcements. And that's part of why it can be good to put them at the beginning, because otherwise, if people really are trying to get to them before the end, then they might just work them in anyway, and you can kind of surface if there's discussion needed at the beginning. Appreciations, this isn't something that is always done, but especially when working with a group of volunteers, actually carving out a space to acknowledge and give some attaboys and attagirls to folks who have been working really hard lately, or successes that your group has had lately, and not just diving right into the business, because that community and goodwill is so critical to an effective group. Agenda review, making sure that everyone's on the same page for the meeting. Committee report backs. It's important, if you're going to include these, to focus on what's really needed from the full group. You can also do report backs from committee meetings by email in the form of notes, or you can do them in, you know, written form, passing them out at the beginning. But it's good for committees to really focus themselves and get clear on what do we really need from the full group, rather than what is everything that we possibly thought of and talked about at our last meeting, because the people who are not on the committee are not on the committee for a reason, and they don't need to have a whole rehash of that whole meeting. Otherwise, your agenda will take forever. Old items, new items, sometimes people split the agenda up this way, and it's just really important for these things to have clear time limits, because these are kind of the meat of the agenda, the discussion that can go on longer than you have time for, unless you're really clear, you know, how much time they should have. And make sure that you give topics that need more discussion and more understanding built enough time. And then at the end, it's really important to make sure you have takeaways and next steps to clarify who is doing what by when. So one idea for how to do this is to have the note taker read back just kind of the to-dos, things that people volunteered to do, and then also to flag if there were ideas that came up for things that should happen that don't have somebody to take them on. Another way to do that is to have each of the participants have a quick go-around and people say what the action items and responsibilities are that they took on, so just to kind of verbally put it out there to everyone as a way to help ensure follow-through. And then lastly, it's important to have evaluation. Lots of times this gets skipped. You only need a few minutes to just say what went well at the meeting and what needs to change for next time. And this is part of having a culture of accountability in your group, is to build in time for evaluation. So I had mentioned ground rules earlier. Here's some examples for ground rules. There's others that your group could use, and I always make sure when I'm facilitating and I put up proposed ground rules to include time for people to add any that I didn't think of or that are important for them to be able to participate. But step up, step back just means that you're asking folks who are really talkative and quick on their feet to pause a little before they jump in, or to be aware of how many times they're speaking, and to step back a little. And likewise, and part of why I like this one more than the don't talk more than your fair share, is to also ask the folks who are more quiet or internal, sometimes it's shyness, sometimes it's just how we process, to step up so that we can, so that the group can benefit from their thoughts as well. So it's kind of a meeting in the middle. Don't interrupt, raise hands, use a stack, and that's again a cue where one person, either the facilitator or the stacker, is keeping track of whose turn it is to talk. Those are probably all kind of straightforward to make sure that people aren't all talking at the same time. I like to include expect unfinished business, because lots of times we have so much to do, and certainly with Move to Amend, we're taking on huge responsibilities that are long-term, and there's no way that we're going to tackle all of it in one meeting. So if we can all just expect unfinished business, we won't be setting ourselves up for that kind of antsy feeling of like we didn't get it all done, because we're not going to get it all done. Honesty and no grudges, or default to trust. Talking to the whole group, not just the facilitators. Lots of times that's something that we need to remind ourselves over and over again. It's just natural to kind of talk to the leader at the front. But the meeting is not the facilitator's meeting, it's the group's meeting. Listen to others in order to understand, and don't just make sure that others understand you. So really, prioritizing listening, appreciating differences, taking responsibility for focusing on what you care about. Disagree, but don't be disagreeable, and practice the doing of liberation and the undoing of oppression. So all of these ground rules are just examples for how to ask the group to take responsibility for the success of the meeting and the success of the group, and not just the facilitator. And then the facilitator's job is to help hold the group to those ground rules, and to, with respect, step in if any of them are being violated, and remind the group of what it agreed. So to that end, it's really important, and I actually think it's good to do this at every meeting, because you either have new people, or we can always use reminders to actually go over those ground rules. If you want to come up with regular ground rules that your group is always going to use, you can do that, or, or you can do it each time. But to actually ask the group for consensus and agreement to follow the ground rules, and also to ask the group if it is okay with having the facilitator take responsibility for reminding the group of the ground rules as needed in the meeting. So that way, when that needs to happen, you actually have the authority to do that as the facilitator. A note on communication between meetings, because this is often something that folks don't quite know how to tackle, especially if you're newer to working with a group. It's a good idea to set up a listserv. So some tools that are already out there that you can use include Google Groups or Yahoo Groups. I really recommend Google Groups. It seems to work very well. That's what Move to Amend uses internally at the national level. You could also use a Facebook group, but you have to make sure that your members are on Facebook, and that might not be true, and you might be excluding some that way. And in general, email might be excluding some people who don't have email. So make sure that there are ways for non-email using folks to also communicate between meetings, or at least know what's going on. And make sure you're clear about what the purpose of the listserv is. Is it an announcement listserv, or is it a discussion listserv? And just making sure that people are clear, and whatever you decide, that that's followed. And so having some sort of like protocol that you decide ahead of time before any issues or disagreements come up is a good idea. You can also use a phone tree. This can be good for announcements. It's also good for, again, building those relationships. So you can either have folks have a set group of people who make those calls, or you could actually do like a traditional phone tree where, I call Kim, Kim calls Nancy, Nancy calls Tina, etc. And you could use text messages as well, especially for reminders about meetings and things like that, or events coming up. But make sure you ask first, because some people are charged per text message, and so you don't want to assume and put those costs on someone who doesn't want to incur them. So I'm going to pause here to go through, and I see that there's a whole list of questions. So if you have others, feel free to type them in, and then I'll go over the next steps after we cover the questions. So Mary Beth Fielder from LA just wants to make sure that we can get this PowerPoint after the presentation so that you can use it at your meeting tomorrow. Yep, no problem. I'll send it to you as a PDF. So Carrie, good. I'm glad to see you were able to join us. Is it possible to utilize the Move to Amend brochure so that we can modify it for local info? Yeah, there's a group in one of our affiliates in Wisconsin, the Milwaukee group, actually changed it a lot, and then there's also potentially a way that we could kind of put in local info. Printing costs are an issue there, and then potentially the other issue is making sure that someone has the technological skills because it's made in InDesign, so you have to actually have that program to really be able to modify it. So probably let's talk one-on-one about how to get you what you need out of the brochures. Kathleen asked, what about approaching high school civics classes? Absolutely, this is a great idea. We've done some presentations to our K to High students before here locally in my community, and right now we don't have materials as Move to Amend, but Ultimate Civics, which is one of our coalition organizations, has put together some stuff, kind of more on democracy in general, but it does talk about corporate personhood for high school and younger, and certainly that would be a good thing to create for Move to Amend. And so if you have interest in that, or if anyone is a teacher out there, we welcome your input on how best to create materials for high school students and younger. Theater from South Dakota, how can we make Move to Amend not just a liberal cause, but reach more conservative groups as well? Well, I think that the best way to do this is to actually do it in communities. So you know best the people in your communities and who those conservative groups that might be reachable. And that's really where we encourage people to in all ways, because really, again, it goes back to those relationships. The best way to bring in folks who might have some disagreement, but we could talk through it and find where the agreement is based in relationships. So, for example, I am on a board with Republicans, and I find that by having those relationships with Republicans, it helps me hone how to talk to other Republicans. So really, I think that's something for our affiliates to take on doing, is making sure to be reaching out to, again, not just conservatives, though, as well. Lots of times are the people who are kind of quickest to respond to Move to Amend are sort of white, middle-class progressives, either, progressive Democrats or Greens, and so that there's all kinds of people who do not fit that definition, and we need to come up with materials and talking points and relationships with people, all of the people who don't fit that definition, because we do need a broad movement. So Margaret is on our field organizing team, and so this is in terms of databasing and keeping track internally of your folks. If you have ideas, feel free to share them with us of good database systems that you use. Let us know. Mary Beth Fielder, what's the best way to use your template to get business cards? We print our business cards in-house. You can go to an office supply store and get, ready-made cardstock that you can just cut up, or not even cut up, you just fold and it's perforated. So I would suggest doing that, and we do have a business card template that folks can use. And I would encourage you to go to a local office supply store when you get those supplies. We don't have t-shirts yet, Mary Beth. Working on it, but at this point we're not there. I'd like to do a t-shirt competition, but we've had other priorities, so the hope is that by Madison we will have some. Daniel Lee from Culver City, California. If there are organizations listed on the Move to Amend website as coalition partners who have agreed to, in principle, to support our cause, do you recommend going after the local chapters, Green Party, Sierra Club, Net Neutrality groups? Absolutely. In terms of using other networks, as I mentioned at the beginning, absolutely going after the ones that you mentioned, and then the other national organizations that are part of Move to Amend that have chapters as well. And we actually do have affiliates can either be brand new groups that are Move to Amend specific, or we also have partner affiliates for those chapters. So those chapters could actually be Move to Amend affiliates themselves. But definitely going to those groups and asking them to pass local resolutions, or asking if you can do a presentation to their meeting to see if there are folks who want to get involved is a really good way. I would also recommend, depending on your Democratic Party local, you could try them. We have a pretty progressive Democratic Party Central Committee here, and a lot of the groups who have passed resolutions have been Democratic Party Central Committees. So, and then I would also recommend going to labor unions too, and being clear again about your ask when you go to those meetings, so that you're, letting people know how they can get involved and what you need from them. When will more details on the convention be available? Mary Lindsay from Kansas City. I will share a few more details in this next steps here, and then we'll be sending stuff out to our affiliate contacts probably next week, and we have another convention call soon. The lead organizer had to go out of town for a family emergency, and he's out of town again right now. So we're a little bit behind on that at this moment, but I'm expecting that there'll be new info posted to the website as soon as he gets back next week, because there's a bunch of stuff that he has that just needs to go up. Mary Beth Fielder, do
you have any materials that would help us present the issue to more conservative groups in ways they might respond to? At this time, we don't, but we did just bring on a new person to our field organizing team, and one of his tasks is going to be to make some sheets, like talking point sheets, for all different constituencies. And I would also encourage folks to, it looks like Kaya wasn't ever able to join this call, but in Madison they have been working with the Libertarians. Actually, I think in Wisconsin in general they've been working with the Libertarians. So they might have some good info for us, and probably folks in Boulder and Madison could give us some info of what has worked for them, because they're, you know, really on the ground as well. Molly Gibbs from Olympia would like to let people in Oregon know that there will be a caucus on corporate personhood at the Veterans for Peace National Convention in Portland, August 6th. Yes, Molly, you can definitely send us an send us the text, and we'd be happy to send it to the folks in Portland. And that's another good reminder of a good group. Vets for Peace has endorsed and is a coalition partner with Move to Amend, and so talking to their locals are another great group to bring in your community. We're going to need to stop soon, so if you could prioritize people who haven't asked questions yet, Gohar. Mary Beth, I left her a phone message. I haven't heard back from her. How about Sandra right here? Sandra asks, why are we using a phone in approach this time? Last time audio came over the line and the presentation cost more. Well, we're using the phone because that allows us to have multiple presenters, but then it turned out that Kaya didn't have the ability to join anyway. And in some ways, it seemed like people had a lot of technical difficulties. There were a number of people who would join the calls and then it wasn't working because their internet speed wasn't high enough. So it does add more of a cost for the phone, and some people don't have long distance. But then the trade-off is that people who have slower internet can't participate. So we're trying it this way. We did it this way last time too, and we didn't have anybody who had any technical difficulties. Our hope had been that people could use the Gmail phone calling, because that worked last time, but then it looks like maybe that didn't work this time. So we'll have to just sort of see. If you want to give us feedback about which way you prefer in the survey at the end, please do so, and we'll try to try different things out to be able to reach different folks. I apologize that there isn't one best solution. Pros and cons to both.